I've been teaching for about 17 years, and over the course of that time, there have been very few students that were particularly difficult to teach. But one student in particular comes to mind, and it was so challenging because of a rhythmic disconnect. It seemed like this student perceived time and rhythm completely different than I did, where I always heard things as being in groups and tied to a beat. It seemed that time was sort of an amorphous onslaught of experience to this student. And we would do things like walk up the stairs and clap together, do all sorts of things. And when we would get in sync, I could tell that it was because he was using visual cues like my hand movement in order to stay in time. So if I were to stop playing and ask him to play on his own, then time would go completely out the window, and it would not just gradually speed up and slow down, but the sense of the pulse was completely non-existent. That might be the only time I've ever really considered if talent exists. And even that, it made me feel like, no, this person simply hasn't had to use rhythm in apparently any aspect of his life. But even that was hard for me to understand, because I would say to him, okay, we're having some trouble with rhythm. Let's go for a walk. And I would watch him walk and I'd say, you're not falling down when you walk. So your pace is still there. If you can walk, that's a very complicated rhythmic thing to do. So you can walk and you can drive and you can do all sorts of things that have to do with managing your time and being in sync with other people. So how come music was so hard? And I'm sure there's a million variables, but today on Earth Tones episode 15, I'd like to talk about talent and what a natural gift is. Rhythm, musical rhythm anyways, was not this student's natural gift, but we still had a good time and we were able to play music. It was just a bit challenging. Welcome to Earth Tones episode 15. I am your host, Jake Pardee. But first, a sound from our beautiful Earth. A beautiful sound. Those are crows and the rain falling in East Gloucester. That was submitted from Michael LaMarche. And Mike says, the crows sort of run the block around here. So that's the sound of the crows being in charge of the neighborhood there in East Gloucester. Now for a bit of old news. Every once in a while, I've mentioned this before, I like to go to Barnes & Noble. I'd like to go to an indie shop if I knew one that had all these great music magazines, but Barnes & Noble usually has some interesting stuff. In fact, the other day, it wasn't as good as this was. I pulled out Electronic Sound. I bought this, I think this was 2001, and 2021. That would have been very impressive. If I was into super cool experimental krautrock in 2001, man, that would have been pretty funny. But no, 2021, the band Can, Inside the Krautrock Kaleidoscope. So I got really into krautrock and Kraftwerk, which I've talked about years ago, in about 2020, I imagine. And the band Can and Tangerine Dream and Noi, those are all great krautrock bands, very legendary. Can is so special because they were very experimental and they made such beautiful music, and a lot of it was improvised, or what they would call spontaneously composed. So this article was about how in 1975, on Halloween night, 50 years ago, Can played in Stuttgart, and it was recorded. And so they released an album called Live in Stuttgart 1975 a few years ago. You can check it out on Spotify. And it's funny because there's an interview here and they say that they do not remember that night whatsoever. The beautiful part about this band is just how unique they were, blending rock and roll and jazz influences. This article is all about how they were very hard to define in the way that they were playing different things. So what I pulled out of this article that I thought was interesting was they said, rock was Can's Trojan horse, through which they expanded the minds of their fans with the same gamut of influences that had formed them, from Stockhausen to jazz, from Ligeti to African drumming. Normal rock bands needed someone out front, but Can were not a normal rock band. The idea of rock music being a Trojan horse is really interesting to me. I've thought about this over the last few years of how blues is really my foundation. I play reggae, I play rock, I play jazz, but when I think about my core and what that foundation is, it's the blues. And that's actually been very encouraging and liberating to me because it allows me to look at things with a lens and feel like I have a musical home. When I've talked about this before, where it can be difficult when you're into so many different styles of music to feel like you belong to something. So Can, the Trojan horse of rock and roll, and then showing up and playing whatever the heck you want to. But they had a lot of success playing interesting music, and it's been very influential. So if you haven't ever heard of Can, check them out in that record Live in Stuttgart, which was performed 50 years ago today. For the main discussion, here it is. This is about talent this week. Talking about talent, your natural gifts. Do you believe in talent? A natural aptitude or skill? I've been playing guitar for so long, I have no idea if I was talented when I started or even if I'm talented now. I've just played for a super long time. Sometimes you hear that talent will only take you so far. Hustle, hard work, persistence will sustain you. But what even is talent? You may have a natural ability to operate your fingers independently. You may have grown up in a musical environment and can listen critically. You may be a dancer and have learned rhythm through movement. How much of these things are environmental? It does seem like we gravitate towards things. Kids certainly show an interest in some things more than others. Is it possible to be talented with no interest? Untapped potential? Dormant talent? To be gifted, to be talented, what does it mean to you? That's what I want to know. I'd like if you could let me know, whether it's comments or sending me an email or text message. Do you believe in talent? It's really hard to say because our lives are shaped by our environments. So I can imagine that people who are in certain environments will be exposed to certain things. If you have been listening to music since you were born and everyone's always been singing along, clapping along, then you probably learn rhythm, you probably learn melody, you learn how to express yourself. I know, for example, that the musicians that I know who have grown up playing in church are often extremely, quote, talented or gifted. They're certainly very accomplished musicians, and they're certainly very skilled experts in playing music. And if you think about it, it makes sense. If every Sunday you had a gig in front of a couple hundred people where you're playing with adults in an ensemble, I would imagine you would develop your skills pretty rapidly. Or if gradually, you still have all those years of being a kid and coming every Sunday. So I think our environments mostly shape our level of skills and our opportunities. So I think talent for me might be more related to interest and passion, or at least it's more relevant. Interest and passion, I think, would allow you to be more interested in being persistent and putting your hard work into something. And we certainly see that young kids can be wildly different from one another, even if they come from the same environment. You can see siblings be interested in totally different things, different tastes in music or activities. One kid might like sports, another kid might like music or art, and they might come from the exact same family with nearly the exact same environment. So I think interest and passion are probably more of a useful metric for whether someone's going to stick to music and develop skills. But I do wonder what you think. Have you seen talent? Do you think that you're talented or are you not talented? Sometimes I think that I've benefited from not having as much talent as I may have wished I had because I've had to persist. And I know my students benefit from my needing to have persisted because I've had to learn to overcome so many obstacles. I know that reading music hasn't been easy for me, and I fortunately was able to develop that skill through playing in school band, playing saxophone, but applying that to guitar and reading music while playing guitar is certainly something that's challenging. Now, I've been doing it for a very long time, so I can read probably as well as, definitely more better than a lot of guitar players, but as well as, the average working musician. I can read pretty well, and I certainly can write pretty well. But I think about how these things that were challenging for me have required me to be persistent, and how that benefits my students because I've learned how to overcome these obstacles and I can help them to overcome their obstacles. So I'm interested in talent. It comes up a lot in my grad school work of whether or not these type of things exist. One of the things that's interesting that I think is something we can do more about are those untapped potentials. If you think about the people who come from environments where they might not have musical opportunities, maybe they do have natural musical gifts, or maybe they have gifts that have to do with mathematics or many different things that they're untapped potentials. So I'm not sure. I don't know if talent exists or if it's more to do with someone liking and having an interest in something where they stick to it and they have an environment that supports them. So for a musical demonstration for today, this might be how I evaluate if somebody has what we could refer to as talent, or at least comes in with a certain baseline skill set. This came from Tomo Fujita. He has a little blues exercise where he goes around a 12-bar blues, but there's a very simple thing that you're going to do. You're just going to play this. The idea is you can hear a lot about somebody's playing. You can hear all those little tempo fluctuations while I'm trying to talk and explain this. But I want to be as steady as I can. So I suppose if I gave that exercise to a kid, say they were about 8 years old, if they hadn't been playing for very long and they could play something really steady like that, I might be able to say, wow, they certainly are talented. Now, there might be other factors at play. Like I said, maybe they had been dancing and singing and clapping along. So I'm not sure if talent exists or not, but there are things that we can tell about somebody's baseline skill sets that will allow them to be musical. So perhaps that's the most useful. And a little challenge like that, which is just playing a very simple pattern, but playing it steady, it tells you a lot about your baseline skill sets. So what is on the turntable this week? What's on the turntable this week is Jeff Beck's Wired. Do you know this album? What I love about this, check it out. On the front, he's playing his white Stratocaster given to him by John McLaughlin. And on the back, he's playing that Oxblood Les Paul, Gibson Les Paul, which I believe is the same one from the Blow by Blow album. So this is now, he becomes the Strat guy. It's almost like if you flip this over, you can just see the transitional time for him. This is 1976 on Epic Records. Once he gets this Strat from John McLaughlin, he becomes a legendary Strat man. Like a David Gilmour, a Jimi Hendrix, and Eric Clapton. Interesting, him and Eric Clapton, both in the Yardbirds, and both become Strat guys. Jimmy Page, though, the other third member of the Yardbirds, the legendary guitar position, never becomes a Strat guy. He was a Telecaster guy, though, with Led Zeppelin. So that is what is on the turntable this week. That is Jeff Beck's Wired. Very influential album. Goodbye Pork Pie Hat. All of these tunes. Lead Boots, certainly some challenging stuff. Jan Hammer is playing synthesizer and was involved with the production. Really great stuff. It's funky, it's fusion, but it's cool. It's rock and roll. Something that helped me this week. I'm going to make a whole episode about this in the future, but something that helped me this week was bite-sized practice. Being able to just play something that is a little chunk of something you're trying to get under your fingers. I've been playing these exercises that have to do with chromatic approaches. And I'm playing these little patterns, and if I can pick up the guitar and just do that for a second in a different position, I do want to play them in all 12 keys and 2 octaves, but if I can just grab it and play a little bite of it, then I'm reinforcing it in my ear and in my hands. So I'm going to talk about that in a future episode, but little bite-sized practice. If you leave your guitar out and you just pick something up, maybe you're working on, say, like a new chord shape. Maybe it's a C6, which is going to come out as a B-flat 6. A C6. Maybe that chord is tricky for you. It is for me. You're stretching between your second and third fingers, a fifth. But maybe that's all you play. Maybe you don't have time to practice right now. You just put your food in the microwave and you're walking past your guitar and you only have 30 seconds. You pick it up, you play a C6, you put it down to get your food out of the microwave. How about that? Bite-sized practice. All right, that is episode 15 of Earth Tones. Do you believe in talent? I'm not sure if I believe in talent. Let me know what you think. Check out Little Kitten Blues, my new song, on Spotify. Visit jakepardee.com for the blog and to sign up for the newsletter, and maritimerecording.com if you're interested in guitar lessons and music production, or if you need your podcast edited, anything like that. I am Jake Pardee signing off. Thank you for listening. This is episode 15, and I'm always here to remind you we are a fantastically musical people on a delightfully musical planet, and I will see you next time for episode 16.